Hello, everybody. Say hi to my guest today, the Beatles Rubber Soul Album cover. I'm going to be taking a look at it from an artist perspective because why not? I'm just going to try to see why we love it so much, why it has such a great vibe. And it does begin with the fact that Robert Freeman took a great photograph. Robert Freeman is the same photographer who took their pick for the cover of the Meet the Beatles album, the Meet the Beatles in the States, where they are kind of standing in half light and half shadow. They're facing forward. Very iconic photograph, and to my way of thinking, it's sort of like Astrid Kircher's photos of them when they were in Hamburg. But I love that photo. Okay, don't get me wrong, but I kind of think that Astrid's photos of them were a lot more evocative. I'm seeing a lot more personality, a lot more emotion in Astrid's photos. Maybe it's because they're in their leathers. Maybe it's because they're still kind of sort of rockers, and they're just punks, basically. And I love those photographs. Now, again, I love that iconic photo that Robert Freeman took for them, for that album cover, but it's not quite as emotional. It's great, but not a lot of emotion, not a lot of expression. But then we have this one right here. This one, the Beatles are trying to get back to who they are, in my opinion, because they're not in their suits anymore. They're not in their leathers, but they're coming close because here they are in their new suede gear, their new gear, like to quote Paul McCartney. And they are in John Lennon's backyard in Kenwood, according to some authors. Photograph taken sometime, around the end part of 1965. But let's just kind of take a look at the compositions here in the beginning. Well, okay, you have, our heroes here, these four guys, and they sort of form one shape. They're the four-headed monster. And I think they look more like a group here than they did, in that Meet the Beatles album cover. That's my take on it. It has that same dark background, the trees, the shrubbery, the guys are in front, you have light and shadow, a lot of contrast, a lot of interest, a lot of emotion, and it has a very laid back feel. And because it's in color, it's a lot more color. It has a lot more like a contemporary feel to it. But the colors, what are they? They're earth colors. So that might be why we think it has that organic, woody vibe, because, everything is kind of like a dark green. You got some browns, you got some blacks, you got some oranges, and some peaches here, a lot of earth colors. And like I said, you have the four guys here, this one shape, nicely offset by this here. So it's a great design. Okay, and I'm not talking about these. I'm just going to ignore this crap up here. So I'm just looking at these guys here and the composition. And this photograph definitely elongated, and we know Paul loves to tell that story where Robert has shown him the photographs, and this last photograph, it kind of tilts over and elongates them. And Paul goes, whoa, can we do that? Yes. Okay. So I love that story, and I love hearing it each and every time. So that's why it's all elongated here. And I am going to show the original photograph of them is very different. And definitely a different composition in that original photograph. So let's take a look at our heroes here. Let's take a closer look. Like I said, we've got the earth colors. It's got a nice vibe. It has a balanced feel to it. It kind of puts you at ease somewhat. But, there's something here that makes you feel maybe a little uncomfortable, and it's the John Lennon stare. Okay, John catches our attention right off the bat here. Because I think that's just who he is. Because with John, you just never know what he's going to do. He could be doing anything, thinking anything. He could say anything, whatever. He could be jumping around or making a funny face at any moment. And he's looking at me right here and saying, I just might do that. Or who knows, maybe he's just, thinking of what he just had for breakfast. Who the heck knows? But that's the cool thing about John. He has that Mona Lisa look on him. And Mona Lisa has that same thing where everybody's like very interested in very simple composition, Mona Lisa, and it has that smile, very enigmatic, just like John here. And so John doesn't need to do a whole lot to get our attention, but he definitely does here. Plus, check him out. He has his shoulder here. There's a little bit more interest. He seems a little bit more forward, not just because he's looking at us, but because he has this extra contrast of his shoulder showing. Now, Paul definitely has his shoulder too, but his shoulder kind of fades into the background color because it's dark, just like the dark background. Okay, and these guys, they all have the same haircut. They're all kind of wearing the same gear, so they do look a lot more like a group. They actually look a lot more human, too. I'm sorry. I do not mean to mock that album cover, that photo. I don't, and I'm not. But again, there's just something more lifelike about this photograph. Please forgive me. Okay, I'm really, really sorry. Okay, so anyway, back to this right now. So you can tell I'm not being super serious. Okay, so but then let's take a look at Paul, because Paul is also kind of standing out here because he's floating up here near the top, kind of separate from John. Now, it's interesting because you have these three figures here. They almost are their own unit because they all are sort of together. They form a nice triangle here, and our eyes, we really enjoy looking at things that make sense to us, and shapes make sense to us, like triangles, squares. They make sense to us. They put us at ease. We like looking at that stuff, but our eyes kind of go to something that is out of the ordinary, like Paul floating up here kind of on his own. And he has a little bit more contrast in his face than the others. His face a little bit paler, and his hair's a little bit darker. So he does get our attention. And in some ways, he might even be vying for attention with John. So just like his writing partners, they have that wonderful creative tension between them, that friction that, makes the magic and creates everything. It's the good tension. So this art piece right here, it has that good tension between these guys because, John's head is up. John's head is elevated. Paul's head is elevated here. We kind of tend to look a little bit more at John because, he's looking at us. But we also look at Paul because he's up here and their heads, they're both elevated. And it's almost like they are together. So you have this little grouping here, but you kind of sort of also have this grouping as well, to my way of thinking because of their head positions. Now let's take a look at George over here. Let's just take a look at George kind of floating off the page a little bit. So again, obviously they all signed off on this photograph and it's great and it's beautiful. George has a very strong face, a lot of strong facial features, but you know what? He's kind of like, even his whole face isn't there. He's kind of cropped off there. His hair is slightly cropped off. He does have a lot of hair. He's a beautiful man. And if you look at the original photograph, he really is a lot more prominent. In that photograph, he's wearing a dark jacket. He's standing, a little bit taller, than John there. Even though he's backing up John, he looks, he still gets your attention because he's taller. There's a lot more of him. And plus he's incredibly good looking. So I don't know. George is just kind of anchoring everything here, sort of like he sort of anchors the Beatles with that lead guitar, and he'll do bass guitar, he'll play maracas, he'll do timbre, he'll do whatever it takes to kind of get the job done. He has your back, he'll stay in the background, he'll sing a song, whatever. So this is George just kind of, not quite taking up the rear, but he's taking the everyman position that will make everything work together. So George has got the anchor position right there, making everything work, balancing everything out, and just being absolutely fine and dandy with it, okay? And then here's Ringo. Let's take a look at Ringo. And Ringo is a little bit more prominent here because, George is floating off over there. But because Ringo is nested in here nice and snug between John and Paul, he sort of seems a little bit more prominent to my way of thinking. Plus, his expression. Ringo has that, kind of a strong, world-weary look on his face all the time, like he's tough, but also, he can be vulnerable. Well, I'm going to tell you, they all can be tough, but they can all be vulnerable. But for whatever reason, Ringo almost always has that look on his face, which draws us in. He's a lot more accessible, which draws him closer to us. He comes a little bit more front and center. But if you look at the original photograph, he's shorter, and he's kind of more tucked in the back. He's still nice and snug between John and Paul, but in this elongated version, in this cropped version, Ringo is a little bit more prominent, even more prominent than George, even though, George is really vying for that space with his strong, beautiful facial features. So they all are, they're all beautiful, individually. They all look great, and they all, they do have a little bit of a glazed look on their face. They all are kind of laid back. Who knows? Maybe they did a little bit of this beforehand. Quite possibly. They are over at John's house. And the other interesting thing about this, like I said, you kind of have these three people like in a group. John, George, and Ringo kind of form their own little group here because it's a nice triangular shape. They're all kind of snug up against each other. Now, and in real life, they are kind of the only ones who, took that other drug, the one that wound up in John and George's coffee one day. So at this moment in time, they all are part of that club. Paul has yet to take it at this point in time. He will, though, like very shortly, like within a couple months here of taking this photograph, Paul's going to join the club and he'll figure it out. So again, and that will bring them kind of all together. I wonder what the photograph would have looked like, if Paul had been a member of that club at this point in time. I don't know. I'm just, see what I'm saying? I'm not being very serious here. I'm being kind of jokey, but really and truly, they do have that laid back look on their faces. They look a little bit like punks. They're taking more control of their career here, during the 1965. There, when that photograph was taken, I don't know, was it taken 1963, maybe 63, 64, when that photograph was taken, the one on the Meet the Beatles cover. They're at the beginning of their career. They are still leaving some of the decisions, in the grown-ups' hands. And they're just kind of saying, okay, go ahead, take the photograph. All right, what, you want us to sing this cover? Okay, all right, well, no, we're not singing that one, but we'll just do whatever. So they're probably still listening to the advice a lot more at that point in time. But here, they're just kind of ignoring the advice, just like when, they made the movie Help this year. And they really and that's the difference. Say, look at the difference between Help and A Hard Day's Night. That's the difference between that Meet the Beatles photo and this one. That Meet the Beatles photo, we'll learn our lines, we'll look good, we'll do this, it looks great, sharp, black and white, it's fantastic, and I love that movie. But Help has its own personality, and this is, they're stoned. They're not learning their lines. They're just monkeying around. They're cutting out scenes they probably can't use. Like, I think they probably only used maybe about 10% of the footage. I bet you there's probably about 5 or 6 more, maybe 20 more hours of footage that they couldn't use. Probably. And I want to see that footage. That would be super duper. But here they are. They have that kind of a stoned, laid back look. We're not learning any lines. We're just going to kind of do these new songs. And here they are. They're getting ready, to go into, getting ready to go into 1966, and all kinds of other stuff is before them. But right here in 1965, it's kind of like a nice little mellow place. And that's what this looks like here, the cover of Rubber Soul, like a nice mellow place. They're still making a few love songs here and there, but now some of the songs are a little bit more introspective. George is coming up with songs like, Think for Yourself. Ringo still got his song on here too, so that's super duper. Ringo isn't quite as strong yet in the band, to my way of thinking. His voice isn't so prominent yet. But in 1966, oh my God. So maybe it was, all the stuff that they were doing, here on the cover of Rubber Soul, all the stuff that they were doing that helped them to come into their own, to become stronger, to find their voices, and to come closer together as a group, and to make, even more Beatles magic. It's just terrific. And again, I think that's what's so great about this cover, because what's coming. You can almost tell it's coming. I think John knows what's coming right here. Anyway, so thank you so much for being here with me today. I really and truly appreciate it. And until next time, peace and love one another. Take care.
Beatles is Beatles are Beatle. In the end, it's like, oh, sod off with the Beatles,